Yeah, we had Paul on December 12th and 13th. We had Russians launching 495 missiles and drones and against Ukraine. And Zelensky he reported, he had a meeting in Europe with German Chancellor. He said not a single Ukrainian power plant untouched by Russian strike. It seems that Russia is escalating the strikes on Ukraine to put, the highest pressure. Do you think that this is part of the plan to put pressure on Zelensky, or Russia is changing somehow its strategy in Ukraine?
Well, I couldn't say. It may simply be because of the recent Ukrainian strike all over Russia, including Moscow. Now, according to Russian reports, it was a massive strike, but it didn't do any damage. Um, why, I don't know. Whether the Russians contained it and shot them down, but um, there was a really massive attack by Ukraine on Russia. So this may simply be in response. So far, uh, the way Putin has misfought this war, whatever Russia did is a response to an initiative by the other side. All of these attacks are a response to something Ukraine does. So, as we've discussed previously, Putin has never approached this conflict with the intention of bringing it to a quick end, which could have been done very easily at the very beginning. He has he did not shut down Ukraine by putting the entire electric grid out of operation, by closing off all rail and sea entry into the country. These are elementary things you do if you're at war and have the capability, which Russia certainly has. And they didn't do it. Nothing was done to stop Ukraine moving weapons, systems, and troops to the front lines. Nothing was done to incapacitate the government in Kiev. Nothing was ever done by Russia to prevent Kiev from being able to continue the war. This is what I find unexplainable. I don't accept the official Russian apology for Putin that he didn't want to hurt our Ukrainian brothers very much. And because he's ended up emptying the country of population. The Ukrainian men that haven't been killed on the battlefront have fled the country. There's 19 million people now in Ukraine. This is an extraordinary depletion of a country's population. So I don't accept the Putin's excuses or the apologies for the way this war has been conducted. And so I don't attach anything to the recent Russian attack on the Ukrainian power grid. Most likely it was in response to the Ukrainian attack on Russia. It just happens to be that, generally speaking, Russia's attacks on Ukraine are more effective than Ukraine's attacks on Russia.
Do you see Europe being capable of absorbing Ukraine by 2027? Because they put it out that they want to let Ukraine into the European Union by 2027. I don't know. How do you see the situation in Europe economically, and how devastating that would be for Europe? Europe is already dealing with a lot of issues, problems.
I'm not sure the EU will exist in 2027. It's fracturing. It's not obeying its own laws. And the individual countries have veto rights, but the unelected officials who run the EU are saying, no, you don't. No, we're not paying any attention to them. The countries who've said we'll veto the seizure of the frozen Russian assets have been told that we ignore you. We pay no attention. Currently, there is a conflict between Italy and the EU over who owns Italy's gold reserves. Italy says Italy owns the gold reserves, and the EU says no, we own it because you don't even have a currency. The Italian lira is long gone. You're using the euro. That's an EU currency. You don't have a currency that needs any backing or reserves. What do you need gold reserves for? You don't even have a currency to use the gold to back. The gold is the EU's. So you can see, and Italy's not comfortable with this, which tells you they're not comfortable with not having a currency. They're not comfortable with the euro because they have no control over the monetary policy. They've learned, like Greece learned, that they can't print the money to redeem their bonds. So when they sell bonds, they can only be redeemed in euros. But if they don't have the foreign exchange earnings that provides them with the euros, they can't redeem the bonds. And so then the German and the Dutch banks can exploit the hell out of them. Just like they did to Greece, they can come in and say, hey, you got to sell all your national resources so you can pay us. You got to close down education and health services and cut this and cut that so you have money in the budget to pay us to redeem your bonds. So this is the situation. And I was amazed that the European countries were sufficiently stupid to ever enter into such an arrangement where they lost their sovereignty. If you don't have your own currency, you got no sovereignty, none. And we saw that they proved it. And you understand, Greece was looted by the EU. So was Portugal and Spain. Well, why does anyone want to be in a situation like that? And now, especially when all of the legal rights you were supposed to still have, such as veto, the current EU thugs say, no, you don't have those rights, or in this particular case, you don't have them. You can't veto the EU stealing Russian money. And to repeat myself, we see now the conflict between Italy and the EU over who owns Italy's gold. So what is the purpose of the EU? What does it serve? It's increasingly conflict between the members. And we've seen the attempt by the EU to sanction its members, like Hungary, which refuses to go along with all the anti-Russian stuff. If I was Hungary, I would too. They're right there. Russia's right there next to them. um, so I think by 2027 the EU will be more fractured. less of an entity. And I think, and perhaps have expressed this before, talking to you, that the reason the EU is hyping the non-existent Russian threat, it's a way of holding the EU together. They say, look, we have to stay unified because we have this great big enemy over here, Russia. They're gonna, as soon as they eat up Ukraine, they're gonna eat us up. We have to be unified so we can resist. So I think that's why Europe is persisting and having the Russian enemy while Trump is trying to get rid of it because it goes beyond any realistic reach of American hegemony. And Trump is saying, well, we're still hegemonic, but it's in our own sphere of influence.
Yeah. Paul, one of the biggest issues with the case of Ukraine and their sort of contact and cooperation with Europeans is the presence of British intelligence, specifically in Odessa, Nikolaev, these cities of high, they're so much important for Russians. And the head of MI6, she said that they're not going to leave Ukraine, they're not going to abandon Ukraine. Anything happening, any agreement, settlement, they're going to be there cooperating with Ukrainians. Do you think that the Trump administration would have some sort of leverage on the British government to change their mind in Ukraine? Because if they want to find a permanent solution for Ukraine, you don't want any intelligence service, in Odessa, specifically in Odessa, which is so important to act against Russians. That would bring again and again maybe some attacks, some chaos, and that could bring a lot again and again in new wars. How do you see on the part of the US government, the Trump administration, and the leverage or the some sort of pressure going putting on the British government, British intelligence?
Yes, I'll tell you, yes, they could, but really this is a problem for Putin, not Trump. And if Putin comes to terms, he'll expect Ukraine to be demilitarized. And so, what's the point of having the British MI6 in there operating against Russia? Uh, so this is in Putin's hands. He'll either say, well, if this continues, then there's no agreement, and we'll just take the rest of the country. There's nothing the British intelligence can do about that. Or if it was Soviet times, the Soviet government would just have the KGB assassinate every member of British intelligence in Ukraine. They'd just simply be killed. And Putin could certainly have that done. It's not in his nature. Don't think he would. I think he'd just say, well, you're breaking the agreement. And so are you ready for the resumption of military conflict? Now, what you ask about, could the United States do something? Well, remember, one man alone, George Soros, was able to bring down the British pound. He was able to overwhelm the Bank of England. Allegedly, according to conspiracy theorists, the controlling arm of the Rothschilds who control the world. Soros broke the Bank of England and the English pound. That's how he got to be a multi-billionaire. Now, if one man can destroy the ability of the Bank of England to protect the British currency from being driven down, thus making huge fortune for Soros, who had shorted it easy to push the British around. Very easy. There are all sorts of things that the Trump regime could do. So I don't think that Trump will see this as his business. He wants out. He understands that the United States can't manage successfully all these conflicts with countries that are as powerful and perhaps more powerful than the United States. It's just not, and that the American people, his supporters, don't want that. And so is he gonna, this is the only hope we have of Trump getting out from under Netanyahu's thumb. The only hope is that the American people are tired of Israel's control, not only of our foreign policy, but over our domestic policies, over the media, over Wall Street, over education, over entertainment, movies. They're tired of it. So it may force Trump to reassert American independence from Israel. It seems to me that's the real problem Trump faces. Can he represent America and Israel when Israel uses us for their wars? When Israel uses our law against Americans to prevent criticism of Israel?